My topic is livestock integration. It was on cover crops, and I kind of added on looking at this livestock use on all of our crop ground that's tied to cover crops or crop residues. And so we've done a lot of work on the livestock side. Started doing work on cover crops in 2006 at Central Grasslands. We've got a lot of data. I'm going to kind of go through, not be data heavy, but show you some pictures and show you some data on what we found in terms of integrating livestock into the system. Good. There we go. So you got to ask the question, why graze? Why should you graze your crop ground, whether you got a cover crop or not? I mean, that's really the question. You know, the cover crop movement has been going strong for probably at least a decade, and the livestock side of it. And I was talking to Derek about this. You know, the livestock producers were probably the first ones that brought cover crop into the system because of the livestock base to it. And if you think about all the cover crops that are out there in the market, I bet 90% of them were forage crops. They were forage crops before they were cover crops. And so when you look at the 5 principles of soil health, it used to be 4, and the livestock integration was added about 6-7 years ago, and for a good reason. The livestock add biology and nutrients to the soil. And so we can look at these different questions. When I look at the biology side, I mean, we talk about biology a lot, but there's not a lot of research out there that shows the biology, you know, what is actually happening in that system. So then we look at nutrients, the enhanced nutrients to the biology. And as we talked about, you don't see a bump in nitrogen after a cover crop system. And I think what the difference here is it's actually the biology that's driven that's going through that system. So we look at nutrients to the microbiome, then the microbiome feeds the crops and cycle the energy. And the last one, as a producer, is economics. We can put a lot of different cover crops in place. Some are cheap, some are expensive. I'm a cheapskate by nature. I like my cover crop to be under $20 an acre. But when you add livestock to the system, now you take that cover crop and make it an economic value for the producer. There's obviously a fine line. Cover crops are designed there to cover the soil, provide a value. We can consume it, but still leave enough cover out there to do its job in terms of soil health. So this is a study we published 2 years ago, looking at the soil microbial activity by grazing intensity. And so it's a bit of a noisy slide, but if you focus on the 0 days, the gray in those lines is no grazing. The yellow is a moderate grazing intensity. The orange is a full stock grade intensity. And the red is more of a heavy grazing intensity. It's basically a temporal effect of grazing within that year. And how does it affect the microbiome? So what we did is we looked at the protist diversity, bacteria diversity, and fungal diversity, then the overall microbiome complexity. The more we graze, the more impact we have. That means we got more urine and more fecal tissue, the greater the complexity is. We get a bump in protists and we get a bump in fungi. We actually don't get any impact on bacteria, but over complexity goes up. So the cattle are adding something to the system that's enhancing the microbiome that eventually is feeding your plants. They're night cycling your soil. So we do know cattle grazing is benefit. And we look at this on any kind of systems that's pasture or rangeland. The worst thing you can do with those systems is not graze. You're going to go backwards. And we clearly show we can enhance the microbiome through the grazing animal. We also looked at this grazing intensities and compared it to no grazing for carbon and nitrogen. We had a greater carbon pool when we grazed at a full rate or a heavy rate temporal. We had a greater organic carbon pool. Remember your organic carbon, you mentioned what you're going to use to get organic matter. We increased carbon nitrogen ratio. If you think about these crops that are high in nitrogen, talked about earlier, they break down. We get more carbon in the system, so we actually get slower turnover of nitrogen. And we do increase ammonia levels, which is your available nitrogen to the plant. So the grazing actually gives you a better response than no grazing at all. That's really the plus of what the animal can do on those crop grounds. So if we look at why don't we graze crop ground, and there's really 3 reasons why producers don't want to graze their crop ground. One is infrastructure. It takes fence, it takes water. Those are all costs to the producer to add to it. Whether you believe or not that cattle add a benefit, it still takes a cost for infrastructure. So you have to pay for that infrastructure. There's also the issue of protection in the wintertime. So we graze our cattle, we just come off of our crop ground about a month ago. So we provide protection. In this country, you have some protection. In the Coteau region, you don't. There's no tree belts. So you basically have to build a protection. The other big issue that farmers will say is compaction. Will cattle grazing enhance increased compaction from that system? And so we tested that as well. And I'll show you the answer to that. Then of course, there are producers who just don't want livestock. And that's fine. You know, I had a producer talk about, well, I don't want to have any cattle. I don't want livestock. And I can still get the benefits of a cover crop. And I say, I agree with you. You get it. But when you add cattle to the system, you get another bump. It's really your choice whether you want to add livestock or not. Is it part of your goals and part of your objectives? So you just ask that question. So I created 2 slides to look at this infrastructure question. And as a cattle producer or a livestock producer, I'm going to show you what you can get from this game. I think every crop ground that has potential to grow a feed, and I don't care if it's residue or a cover crop, has value to a livestock producer. So I just looked at one section of land, 640 acres. I fenced that at $15,000 a mile. That's $60,000. Dickinson there might be on the low end. Streeter might be on the high end. But I've budgeted $60,000 for a fence. I've budgeted $20,000 for water. We actually can do it for about $14,000 at home, but Dickinson, you might have to find somebody who can drill a well. But I budgeted $20,000 for water. Then I budgeted up, that's the last one we had, just a tank. This was a different trial we had when we put Richies in. And then I added protection. We can get those panels for about $1,500 a piece. We build 2 protection sites, and then so I had about $6,000. What we find when we actually graze bale grazing, the cows don't use them. They use the bales more than anything else for protection, but you still should have protection for those cows. So we spent about $88,000 upfront cost for infrastructure on that one section of land. That seems fair, Kirk? So far, so good. So if you take that, there's also opportunities. And I'm not sure if NRCS does any funding or equip on crop ground. Thought they did now, that was new and they added. So you got opportunities to go get some dollars with NRCS. You're in the Coteau region, you got Ducks Unlimited, Residents Forever. There's opportunities to get some cost share to build that fence, but I'm going to do it without cost share. So our total cost is $88,000. You amortize that out for 20 years, that's $4,400 a year. I did not include interest, but which is a real cost, obviously. So if you take that out, this is my example. So what I did is so the last one I had, never backwards, no, I can't. The last one was actually just grazing corn residue. This one's a winter cereal. This is not our trial, but this is a winter cereal that we planted the previous year. I use an average of 2,000 pounds of feed on that crop ground, whether it's residue, cover crop, or whatever you want to do. 2,000 pounds is probably a fair number. This is a cover crop mix that we had a couple of years ago. This would produce almost 10,000 pounds of feed. So it's going to vary. And of course, Western North Dakota, you'd have to have a really good moisture to get 10,000 pounds of feed. So at 2,000 pounds, I'm only going to consume half of that, which gives me 1,000 pounds consumed by the animal, which I think most of our crops partners can do. You break that down, that produces we could graze 60 head of cattle for 1 month at 24 cents a day. How many here would love to feed cattle for 24 cents a day? Even if it's 40 cents a day, even if it's 50 cents a day, it's a heck of a deal. Even if it's $1 a day, it's a heck of a deal. So the opportunity on these crop grounds to add a soil health benefit and provide cheap feed is really a good selling point for adding these in the livestock system. It's a good selling point for using livestock in these systems. Got it written down? I got one more after that. So I'll look at streeters. So we graze all of our crop ground. All of our crop ground, which is about 2,000 acres, has a fence around it and water. This year we grazed on our crop ground from early November to late February. Great snow year. Great when you got much snow, you can graze a long time. We started supplementing on that crop ground because our cover crop is eventually gone because we're feeding 400 head of cattle on there. And then we start supplementing around Christmas and they go on a full TMR in January. So we are feeding on there. We're always adding our nutrients on that crop ground throughout the season. The trick is you need to come off by, in our case this year, early March. Got warm. I don't want any pugging from those cattle. So then we kind of come off that late February, early March, and then we feed them. We brought them home about 3 weeks ago because we started calving about a week ago. And so that's the opportunity you can use on these crop grounds in terms of, I'm not spreading manure now, I'm reducing my costs. It's kind of a win-win. Other options on these crop grounds, you can bale graze. There's a lot of bale grazing going on in the Northern Plains. The Canadians were first to do the bale grazing. This is a study we're doing where we did some bale grazing on crop ground. It's a great way to put nutrients on the ground versus hauling nutrients out. This is what we did this year. We actually did some swath grazing on some crop ground. You can see the manure spread evenly across this field, urine even across the field. It's another great way to keep cows out of the lots and on crop ground to add nutrients to that system. The other one is, this is what we do the last 2 months, is we just feed on crop ground. It's just a great way to keep cows out. It keeps them moving, keeps your cows healthy. It's just a great way to keep a healthy herd. All right, so let's look at some integrated livestock. And I'm going to get through this compaction question. We'll get through how it impacts crop production within some of these systems. So first of all, the beauty of cover crops is they make a phenomenal forage base. And so this was a 5-way mix we did quite a few years ago. This is an average of 4 years. The blue bar is the legumes, and this is the first one is early October. The last one's end of December, and you can see how protein value declines throughout the season within these standing cover crops. Legumes kind of peter out. As soon as we get a hard freeze, the legumes really desiccate. And so you kind of lose your legumes. The brassicas are really the cat's meow for quality feed. You can't beat a turnip or a radish or a kale. They retain their quality late in the season. You can see we're sitting at almost 16% on the first week of December within those brassica crops. The greenish bar is actually small grains. Small grains hold their value well until they actually desiccate to the point where they go from green to brown. Then you see they kind of drop a little minimum requirements. That dotted bar is the minimum requirements of a dry bred cow. Then we compared it to native range, which was the blue one. Then the warm seasons is that purple one. So the beauty of these cover crops is they give you great quality feed late in the season. The negative on the brassicas is they're really high in water. And so if you're feeding a high brassica mix, you should provide some fiber to them. We do. We provide fiber to those cows to slow passage down. Otherwise, if you get behind that cow on a pure brassica, you're going to be back about 10 feet. You're going to get splashed. 8 feet apart. But it makes a really nice mix for grazing opportunities. If you want to use a cover crop and hay, there are those who want to hay it to a degree. We stay away from the brassicas because they're too high in water. They're hard to dry down. But there's flexibility in there, and it does provide a really good feed base for cows. How these cows perform? In 4 of the 5 years, these cows gain weight. They always gain weight except for 2010. 2010, on our pure millet stand, they lost weight. On our pure turnip stand, they also lost weight. But on the cover crop mix, even in a year where we had 2 feet of snow, it was 10 below in October, they still performed above. They still gain on that cocktail mix. That's why we don't recommend using a monoculture as a cover crop mix for grazing. Now we do it with the rocks. But the cover crop mix gives you that flexibility and that difference in terms of nutritional value, fiber content, slow passage, and you get a nice performance on that. So you can see cows will do well. We've done it with heifers in the fall. Depending on the cover crop mix, heifers will either gain weight. Some of them will lose weight on. This is normal of how old that heifer is. So that's the benefit of the livestock side. And I get asked to do a lot of talks on the livestock side of cover crops. And to me, it's a win-win. It's a great food base. They perform well. It's just a great tool that they can have. That's just that bad view. So let's get to the compaction question. This is the number one question I get from farmers because I don't want cattle. I'm going to deal with compaction. So I have 3 different studies here. We looked at compaction. This was the first study we looked at, and this was actually in 2012 through 14. It was a small grain crop followed by a 6-way mix of a cover crop. Had those legumes, brassicas, small grain, and a warm season crop. And we looked at, so it was a dual cropping scenario. We either grazed the dual crop or we did not graze the dual crop in the fall. In 2 of the 3 years, there was no difference between the dual crop with grazing and without grazing in terms of compaction, in this case, bulk density. In the second year, we actually had a significant drop in compaction when we grazed. So all 3 years, it was neutral or positive in terms of compaction of livestock in the fall grazing. I can almost guarantee you, probably figure, if you're fall or winter grazing, your crop ground, because of our freeze-thaw cycle, you will not get compaction. It's the spring where you got the issues, or can have the issues. So that was that trial. The wrong button. This was a study we just finished up looking at cover crop grazing in the summer and fall. We compared to cover crop only, which is your far left. We did a take half, leave half of cattle grazing. We did actually what I'd say 75% use means you removed about 80% of the above ground biomass. And then we had an annual crop as a comparison. This would be no cover crop, just that annual crop. We did this for 3 years. We saw no difference in compaction with summer and fall grazing on any of these treatments with cows or without cows. So it was neutral across that system for 3 years. This is the one we're just finishing up now. We're going to have another year of this in 2026. But we looked at grazing winter rye with soybeans. It was actually a soybean corn rotation. So the first year was a small grain seeded to a rye. The next year was beans, which would have been this one here, followed by corn for silage, followed by corn for grain, followed by soybeans in 2026. So our first year before the soybeans, we grazed this. We had 2 different systems. So your far left is spring grazing only. So we had heifers go out there in May. They graze for 5 to 10 days. That's really all you're going to get in that early period. The dual grazing would have been grazed in the fall and then again in the spring. And then the no grazing would be no grazing, just straight rye. Then we had a treatment with no rye and no grazing. That's the far right one. We did it at Central Grasslands and we did it at Carrington. That was a lot of description for no difference in terms of compaction. So whether we grazed it or not, even in the month of May, we did not get an impact on compaction within those systems. So we're going to repeat this. We did this. We'll repeat it again in 2026. So our goal here is to look at soybeans in the end. We also looked at aggregate stability. So you want aggregate size. You want to have porosity so water can move through and not erosion. So your goal is to reduce those micro nutrients. This is a great picture that shows to your left. That's what you want. You want a stable aggregate. The one to the right is an unstable aggregate, and so that's where you see your erosion at. So that's kind of the picture there. So we had 2 different experiments looking at aggregate stability. This is the one where we looked at dual cropping system. So there's 3 different treatments. There's the non-use, there's the take half, leave half, and then the full use. We collected pre-data. There was virtually the same in terms of aggregate stability using the WSSI method. And then 3 years after treatment, the whole soil stability, actually we had a more stable soil with the full use, followed by the take half, leave half, followed by no use. This is one of the few studies that actually showed a benefit to aggregate stability. Normally they're neutral, but this was our first year when we did this, so we followed with some more studies. Again, grazing did not have an impact or had a positive response to aggregate stability. And that soybean trial we did at Carrington and Central Grasslands has the same ones from dual grazing, spring grazing, no grazing. We saw no difference in aggregate stability within that study. That had been 1 year following, and we'll do it again in 2026 to look at 4 years of grazing across that system. The question came up with Ezra is soil nutrients. Then if you're just going to go out there and look at soil nutrients and hope for a response, you're going to be disappointed. You're not going to see a bump with traditional soil testing on nitrogen, N, P, and K. We didn't see it. We saw the microbiome though. So I'll show you 2 slides. This is too noisy and I apologize to it, but just to point out here, nitrogen's at top, full use, take half, leave, and no use. Phosphorus is second, potassium is third. We saw no change and no treatment effect in the soil nutrients across the study. The only bump we had was in the full use. We got a bump in potassium after 3 years of grazing. Was it real or not? I don't know, but we had that's the only thing we showed. No change in nitrogen. The other trial we did with cover crops, same story, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. We saw no change in nutrients after 3 years of a treatment, whether I grazed it or not. and whether I had a cover crop or not. Because here's your traditional grazing. We didn't see it. And I've been doing this now for going on 15 years, and I've never seen this bump on paper doing your soil test. But I'm gonna show you some data that shows we got a bump in production. So obviously there's something going on in the biology. So let's look at the weed control, and the beauty of rye, of course, is you get natural weed control. So we looked at winter rye, grazed and not grazed on weed control. This picture here is a non-rye, non-grazed control, one of the replicates. And so if you look at Streeters to your left, Harrington to the right, you have the spring graze only, you got the spring plus fall graze or fall plus spring graze, no graze, and then no rye. Wherever we had no rye, we had more weeds. That's the beauty of rye. And the driver here is not the grazing, it's the rye. We graze it, so we can shove it to the cow and get some value to it. But whether I graze it or not, it's irrelevant. The rye is giving me a weed control benefit, which was nice to see. We've seen this over all 3 years we've done this now. This is one of the years, and we have a PhD student on this trial. All right, so let's look at, here's a picture to your left is the non-grazed, to the right is actually a grazed. Rye, that's actually wheat stubble, which you have there before on that trial. And then the soybean got planted, this soybean's already planted here. All right, so let's look at some cash crop production. I'm gonna look at corn first. This was a study that we had a PhD student on, looking at grazing cover crops with and without fertility at Fargo, Streeter, and we had 4 different ranches. So that far left one that's got a blue box around it, the light blue is no grazing and no fertilizer. And that'd be bushels per acre is your legend. The dark blue is no grazing plus fertilizer. So fertilizer gave us about a 35 or 40 pound bushel bump with fertilizer. The other ones is grazing. So you have 50% use with grazing, 50% use with fertilizer, 50% use with no fertilizer, 75% use with fertilizer, and 75% without fertilizer. So this was just look at the non-fertilized treatment with both grazing, they're about the same. We had a 15 bushel bump with grazing and no fertilizer compared to corn with fertilizer. And we had a 50 bushel bump when none of them were fertilized. So the cattle are doing something to give you a bump in production. So I'm going to show you with fertilizer. This is now the fertilizer comparison. The left is the same. When you add fertilizer with grazing, we had a 60 bushel bump with fertilizer and grazing versus the fertilizing alone. And compared to no grazing, no fertilizer, it's 100 bushel bump. And I just showed you there's no difference in the soil nutrient levels when we test it. So something's going on that's giving this bump. And I'm 100% it's biology. It's what's going on in the biology below the ground. So we can increase more production with livestock grazing versus not. That's another bump. So we also took to the level of, well, this is a picture Aaron took. Your farthest left corn cob is no grazing, no fertilizer. Of course, you're gonna have the smallest cob. The next one is no grazing with fertilizer. Everything else in there are grazed with and without fertilizer. That's a great visual tool that shows you the difference in production on corn. So we looked at soybeans. So this is the year the soybean was the first year of our trial. It was 2023. It was a dry year for us. I think we only averaged, I hate to say this, 13 bushel an acre. But my insurance check was good. Barrington averaged around 20, I think 7 bushels an acre. We saw no difference whether we grazed or not. In this case, that's a win. I don't want graze to have a negative effect on production. I'd like to see a bump. And there's some work out of Iowa that does show Nebraska that shows grazing with your cover crop gives you a bump in soybeans. It's about 3 bushels on that side that they did. I was happy we were neutral. We'll get this in 2026 again with 4 years of grazing, and I'm curious to see what happens. We're also going to collect data this year on the non-grazed, non-rye trial and look at the soil microbiome complexity compared to the grazing for 4 years. I would assume I'll see a difference. I'm going to spend the money to find the data, so I'm just curious what's going on in that system. That's our soybeans. When you look at livestock performance, When we graze in the fall, so that yellow bar is fall grazing, pounds of beef produced per day, we tend to lose weight. If you got a 900-pound heifer that's pregnant, I can't get enough groceries in her, so we lose weight. I think this year, 2025, we actually lost 3 pounds a day on those heifers. That year it was 2.7 pounds a day gain on those heifers. We're only grazing for 2 weeks. I can live with that because they're coming in fat anyway. But the fall grazing, unless you have a lot of biomass there, like a traditional cover crop, you're probably going to lose weight on a young heifer. When you graze in the spring though, we average about a ½ pound gain on both our spring trials. In the end, we got 21 days more grazing with the 5 days plus 16. We grazed for 16 days in the feedlot. We averaged 1.25 pounds a day gain, but I had to pay for feeding that animal. I grazed for 21 days for free. The cover crop was labeled soil health technique. We just consumed it with the cow to get a benefit from that soil health side. And so in terms of performance, in terms of cost, I have a cost slide on this one, and I forgot to put it in, but it's too messy anyway. The only one that makes you money is this one, the dual crop. You actually make money. The fall you lose money. The spring by itself, it's about a wash. And then that's compared to this year to the feedlot system. So I'm to summarize, adding livestock grazing in terms of compaction, it's neutral to positive. I didn't show you infiltration data. Our infiltration data was neutral. We saw no difference in infiltration whether we grazed it or not on the soybean trial. Aggregate stability was neutral or positive. Nitrogen, neutral. Potassium, neutral. Phosphorus, neutral. Organic matter, based on we have more organic carbon in one of them, was neutral to positive. When we look at these are, that's just a note. Sorry. So look at economics. Integrating livestock can create a return for farmers' investments with cover crops. And as I tell the story, I think there's more opportunities for producers, for farmers in particular, if they're willing to put some infrastructure in place to get a benefit from soil health and also economic value. It comes down to this debate on if you have the opportunity, what's a cow producer willing to pay to come graze your cover crop? Because in the end, you're getting the soil health benefit from the livestock. But whoever that has the cattle still should be paying in some value because they're getting a forage base to it. We've asked that question for probably about 5 or 6 years. No one's ever run an economic study of what that cost should be. But I'd be curious to figure out what that cost is. So raising cover crops can reduce your winter feed costs, also reduce your labor costs, but also reduce your fuel costs. You're not starting a tractor. And so you get this soil health benefit in the end. That's my last slide.